the pure space inside you. Why you feel so empty and restless. Zen wisdom. There is an extraordinary, unexamined architecture to the silence that descends upon the human psyche when the relentless momentum of daily striving is brought to a complete, intentional halt. In the ordinary course of our modern existence, we are thoroughly conditioned to perceive our lives through a linear, chronological lens, continuously viewing our immediate reality as nothing more than a transitional bridge designed to transport us toward an idealized destination in the future. We wake up in the dawn hours with our minds already leaping forward into the geometric grids of our daily schedules, calculating our professional trajectories, anticipating potential conflicts, and organizing our psychological resources to maximize our efficiency within a highly competitive socioeconomic system. We move through our environments with a state of hyper-attentive velocity, treating the physical spaces we traverse as empty, boring voids that must be eliminated as rapidly as possible to achieve our next strategic milestone. This permanent outward orientation creates a profound, systemic alienation within the human core, transforming us into permanent spectators of our own existence, sleepwalking through a world of unmediated miracles while our consciousness remains completely colonized by abstract mental projections, strategic narratives, and digital data streams. Yet, when we choose to step out of this automated momentum, adjusting our physical frame into a posture of absolute stillness and directing the total spotlight of our attention inward, we encounter a reality that completely shatters our conventional understanding of identity. We find ourselves standing within a vast, silent, and incredibly spacious interior plaza that exists entirely independent of our biographical history, our social titles, or our economic status. This internal terrain is not an empty, terrifying void, nor is it a complex psychological puzzle that requires intense intellectual analysis to decode. It is the raw, primary field of pure awareness itself, the immaculate baseline of human consciousness that has been quietly hosting our entire life story since the exact microsecond we emerged from the darkness of the womb. When we drop beneath the superficial layers of our mental chatter, our emotional reactivities, and our narrative worries, we make the gentlest and most revolutionary discovery available to a human entity: the realization that the essential, aware part of our being is already existing in a state of absolute, unshakable peace, completely untouched by the turbulence of our historical circumstances, and entirely free from the structural need for fixing or improvement. To comprehend the depth of this systemic return, we must carefully dissect the intricate psychological mechanisms that maintain our state of chronic internal imprisonment. The ordinary thinking mind operates precisely like an advanced, perpetual motion engine, driven by an ingrained survival reflex to continuously label, evaluate, categorize, and judge every internal and external stimulus it encounters. It constructs a rigid, highly defensive armor out of our past memories, our developmental wounds, our personal preferences, and our conceptual beliefs. This structural construct, the historical ego self, is a remarkably fragile entity that demands an immense, non-stop expenditure of psychological currency to protect its boundaries and validate its existence. It lives in a state of perpetual comparison, scanning its environment for signs of approval or threat, measuring its progress against the achievements of other entities, and endlessly rewriting its personal narrative to secure a fleeting sense of legitimacy. We become so thoroughly hypnotized by this internal commentator that we mistake its shifting thoughts, its volatile emotions, and its transient moods for the absolute, enduring truth of who we are, living our lives inside the narrow parameters of our own mental commentary, completely severed from the boundless, living universe that unfolds directly before our open senses. Zen psychology introduces a direct, uncompromising intervention into this state of universal self-forgetting, inviting us to execute a fundamental shift in the locus of our human awareness. It does not demand that we engage in a violent struggle to suppress our thoughts, eradicate our natural human desires, or manufacture an artificial state of mental blankness. Such aggressive efforts are merely another manifestation of the performance paradigm, an egoic attempt to achieve a stylized spiritual ideal through the exercise of personal willpower instead The practice simply asks us to step back and adopt the role of the non-interventionist witness, transitioning our attention from the content of our thoughts to the vast open context of awareness within which those thoughts are currently surfacing, lingering, and dissolving. When you stand before a magnificent, expansive window, your eyes are naturally captured by the dramatic landscape outside its movement of the clouds, the texture of the trees, the architecture of the buildings, and the play of light across the earth. You rarely, if ever, consciously notice the clear glass pane itself, yet without that transparent, unmoving medium, your perception of the external landscape would be completely impossible. In precisely the same manner, we are permanently mesmerized by the passing imagery of our cognitive processes, completely overlooking the pristine, transparent space of pure consciousness that enables those mental movements to be known. Let us verify this structural reality through direct, immediate observation within your own current frame of reference. As your eyes track these words across the page, notice that there is a fundamental baseline of wakefulness, an effortless capacity of knowing that is hosting the visual shapes, the conceptual meanings, and the acoustic sounds of your environment. Now, let an abstract thought of worry regarding your future obligations deliberately surface within your mind. Observe it clearly. Watch it appear within the space of your consciousness, remain active for a few brief seconds, and then naturally fade away, dissolving back into the absolute silence from which it originally emerged. The crucial question that dissolves the illusion of the separate self is this: what is the nature of the space that remains when that thought disappears? Does your primary capacity to be conscious vanish along with the thought? Does the knowing field suffer any structural damage, or does it remain completely intact, open, luminous, and perfectly ready to host the next experience? When you look with absolute precision, you see that this underlying knowing space is completely unaffected by the quality of what it knows, just as a pristine silver mirror is never modified, stained, or permanently altered by the beauty or the horror of the reflections that dance across its surface. This immediate recognition is the ultimate antidote to the chronic state of psychological fragmentation and nervous exhaustion that characterizes the contemporary era. We live within a hyper-industrialized, digitally saturated civilization that treats the human soul as a consumer asset that must be continuously optimized, quantified, managed, and performed for an anonymous public audience. We are bombarded by a relentless, multi-trillion-dollar torrent of digital data streams, automated notifications, global trends, and shifting cultural expectations that systematically fracture our attention, pulling our awareness outward into a state of permanent dispersion. We become precisely like fragile leaves caught in a violent windstorm, tossed about by every passing wave of public opinion, comparative anxiety, and manufactured lack. We run from the experience of absolute silence because the moment our external distractions are removed, we are forced to confront the internal disarray of our untended minds. We reach for our glowing screens to sedate the rising tide of our own unacknowledged sorrows, fears, and historic grievances, completely unaware that the very presence we are running from is the single sanctuary of unconditional love and peace we have been searching for our entire lives. The path back to this internal sanctuary requires no financial transaction, no exotic travel to distant monasteries, and no submission to external dogmatic authority. It is fully operational and entirely accessible to you within the absolute immediacy of this current respiratory cycle. Your breath is an extraordinary somatic anchor, a direct manifestation of cosmic intelligence that has been accompanying your life since the exact second you emerged from the darkness of your mother's womb. It operates as an invariant constant, quietly, reliably, and effortlessly sustaining your organic existence in the background, while your analytical intellect is busy chasing illusions and manufacturing crises in the external world. The moment you choose, through an act of radical personal sovereignty, to bring the complete spotlight of your human attention to the physical sensation of an inhalation, you are executing a profound act of self-reclamation. You are pulling your awareness out of the non-existent timelines of past regrets and future projections, and grounding it firmly in the unyielding reality of the present. Let us deconstruct the physical and psychological anatomy of this return with absolute somatic precision. As you draw air into your biological form, tune your attention to the precise tactile sensation of the stream as it brushes past the threshold of your nostrils. Trace its downward trajectory through your throat, watching with unblinking internal awareness as your lungs expand. Your chest wall widens and your diaphragm gently descends, pushing your abdomen naturally outward. You are not attempting to manipulate your biology, to breathe in an artificial, stylized pattern, or to force your mind into a state of artificial compliance. You are simply bearing witness to the natural flow of life within your form, realizing with absolute clarity. Breathing in, I am entirely present for this inhalation. At the peak of that inward movement, inside the microscopic pause before the air shifts direction, you encounter an immaculate clearing of absolute stillness. There is nothing to accomplish, nothing to defend, and nothing to perform, just the pure, unadulterated experience of being alive. As your body naturally begins to release the air, follow the outward movement with identical fidelity. Watch the abdomen settle, the ribs contract, and the warm air pass back out over your upper lip into the world. With this release of physical substance, consciously permit your nervous system to let go of its accumulated psychological tension. Feel the structural fists within your shoulders, your neck, and your jaw begin to soften and open. Follow the exhalation completely until the very last molecule of air has departed your frame, resting your awareness inside the profound emptiness that manifests before the next breath naturally arises. To complete this cycle just once with unbroken presence is to step entirely out of the social machine of continuous performance. You have re-established your absolute autonomy as a free agent, proving that peace is not a distant material destination to be reached after the resolution of all life's conflicts, but an intrinsic property of your immediate biology. When you cultivate this baseline of respiratory awareness, you begin to perceive your physical body in an entirely fresh light. In our hyper-intellectualized culture, we routinely live as disembodied entities, existing exclusively within the crowded penthouse of our analytical thoughts, while treating our bodies as passive, utilitarian vehicles designed to transport our brains from one meeting to another. We ignore the silent messages of our physical frame until it manifests an emergency in the form of pain, illness, or severe exhaustion. The practice of mindfulness reverses this alienation, inviting us to drop the elevator of our attention down into the deep somatic landscape of our own skin. We practice the body inventory, directing our kind, non-judgmental attention through every coordinate of our physical form, witnessing the precise locations where we have been storing the unprocessed sediment of our daily stress. Think of the accumulated tension that lives within your masseter muscles, the rigid locking of your jaw that preserves the physical record of every boundary you failed to defend, or every word you chose to suppress to protect your social security. Think of the chronic tightness within your shoulders and upper back, the physical crystallization of your perceived socioeconomic duties and psychological burdens. Think of the constriction around your heart and diaphragm, where your breathing stays locked in a narrow, shallow pattern, because your autonomic nervous system has been trapped in a state of continuous sympathetic alert. When you bring your mindful awareness down into these tight coordinates, you are not attempting to aggressively force them to relax. You are simply providing them with a safe, compassionate container of presence. You breathe directly into the tightness, greeting it with absolute gentleness. My dear tension, I am home now, I see you, and I am here to take care of you. Under the warm light of this non-demanding attention, the frozen structures of your stress naturally begin to soften and melt, allowing your body to return to its natural baseline of fluid ease and biological harmony. This internal realignment completely transforms the manner in which you move through geographical space. Consider the routine, automated transitions that define our days. The walk from a vehicle to an office building, the movement between rooms in a domestic home, or the pacing through a public corridor. Normally, we experience these transitions as empty, boring voids that must be eliminated as rapidly as possible to reach a destination. Our bodies are moving forward across the concrete, but our minds are sprinting ahead, already managing the upcoming tasks or replaying past interactions. We treat our immediate environment as an invisible backdrop, completely blind to the spectacular miracles of reality that sit directly before our senses. The practice of walking meditation transforms every single step you take into an explicit spatial homecoming. It suggests that your true destination is never the office, the meeting, or the store. Your ultimate destination is the here and the now. With every step your foot makes upon the earth, you intentionally slow the momentum of your existence, matching the physical movement of your limbs to the natural rhythm of your respiration. As your heel makes contact with the ground, you fully inhabit the sole of your foot, feeling the gradual transfer of your body weight across the arch, the building pressure upon the ball, and the firm push-off from the toes. You mentally declare with each step, arrived home. You are no longer running through your life to reach an imaginary point of future completion. You are reclaiming the absolute sovereignty of your immediate physical movement, realizing that the simple capacity to walk upon this vibrant planet in health, surrounded by the colors of the sky and the acoustic symphony of the world, is an extraordinary wonder that deserves your full presence and appreciation. By practicing this spatial grounding, you systematically build what can be described as your emotional muscle, as the capacity to remain completely centered and non-reactive in the face of life's inevitable turbulence. When you are no longer identifying as a fragile, separate character caught in a dangerous story, your relationship with difficult human emotions undergoes a complete metamorphosis. When a wave of intense anger, paralyzing fear, or deep sorrow surfaces within your system, your automated instinct is no longer to panic, to run away, or to instantly sedate yourself with a digital display. You recognize that these difficult emotional states are not character flaws or evidence that you are failing at life. They are the highly intelligent indicators of your internal guidance system, alerting you to the places where your consciousness has become entangled in illusion. You interface with these difficult emotions precisely like a loving biological mother, responding to the sudden distress of her infant child. When a baby begins to cry, a truly compassionate mother does not scold the infant, demand that it justify its tears through logic, or walk out of the room to distract herself. She immediately stops her external labor, lifts the child into her arms, and cradles it tenderly against her chest. She provides the infant's frantic nervous system with a vast, stable container of absolute warmth and security. As she holds the child close, her own calm, regulated heartbeat and biological peace begin to penetrate into the baby's frame, causing its crying to naturally soften and de-escalate. This is the exact technology you deploy within your own psyche. You wrap the arms of your mindful attention around your rising anger or your deep anxiety, holding it with infinite gentleness. My dear anxiety, I see you clearly. I am not going to run away from you anymore. I am right here with you, and I am going to hold you until you feel safe, under the steady, warm gaze of your own non-judgmental presence. The sharp, hostile contractions of your suffering naturally begin to relax and dissolve, transforming from an overwhelming emergency into a manageable, integrated aspect of your human experience. This capacity for deep self-compassion is the indispensable foundation for any authentic transformation within our interpersonal relationships. There is an absolute law of human psychology that our modern consumer culture goes to immense lengths to deny. You are fundamentally incapable of offering to another human being a quality of love, intimacy, or presence that you have not yet cultivated within your own internal repository. When an individual lives in a state of total self-alienation, running from their own mind and neglecting their inner house, every relationship they initiate will inevitably become an act of desperate emotional extraction. They will approach their romantic partners, their children, and their friends as emotional consumers, looking to extract a sense of worth, validation, and security from them to fill the aching void in their own chest. This creates an immensely fragile, exhausting dynamic that pressures the other person and eventually triggers defensive conflicts, mutual resentment, and deep emotional isolation. When you establish your permanent residence on the island of self, your human connections are entirely liberated from this transactional exhaustion. Because your inner house is full, grounded, and sustained by its own source of light, You arrive at the threshold of the other person from a state of radical abundance. You no longer need them to behave in a stylized, predictable manner to preserve your internal peace. Your gaze transforms into an immaculate mirror that reflects their inherent dignity back to them, without the distortion of your egoic needs. You become capable of offering them the rarest, most transformative gift available in our contemporary world, your complete undivided presence. You can listen to their joys and sorrows with a non-demanding ear, providing them with a vast sanctuary of unstaged safety within which they can lay down their defensive armor, expose their deepest wounds, and relax into the reality of who they truly are. This individual realization naturally matures into the shared construction of a collective homeo-relational sanctuary, built upon the mutual stability of individuals who have learned to be at peace within their own skin. In this space, communication ceases to be a rapid, reactive exchange of digital text and defensive arguments, returning to its true form as an art of deep spiritual communion. Conflicts are no longer perceived as existential emergencies that threaten the survival of the bond. They are approached with gentle curiosity, leveraged as direct opportunities to look deeply into the unhealed wounds of the other person and respond with greater compassion. The relationship transforms from a web of mutual codependency into a dynamic launching pad for shared creativity, service, and joy, providing the world with a living demonstration that it is entirely possible to construct a realm of absolute sanity and unconditional love within our complex human society. As this peace stabilizes within your awareness, it naturally radiates outward, breaking through the boundaries of your immediate household and touching the wider matrix of our collective civilization. We live in an era characterized by intense social polarization, systemic anxiety, and continuous ideological disputes. We flood our media platforms with massive cascades of activist commentary and structural critiques, believing that if we can just manipulate the external systems of our world, we will finally establish a harmonious society. But a society is not an independent, abstract entity. It is nothing more than the collective projection of the individual minds that constitute it. If our individual hearts remain fragmented, angry, and deeply isolated, it is a structural impossibility to build a peaceful external world. The chaos we witness in our public squares is simply our individual self-abandonment written large across the landscape. Therefore, the choice to sit quietly on a cushion, to walk mindfully across a parking lot, or to listen to a distressed colleague with absolute presence is the most radical, effective act of social service you can execute. You are introducing a clean, uncontaminated element into the poisoned psychological field of our civilization. You are demonstrating to all who encounter your presence that peace is not an impossible utopian dream, but a practical, biological alternative that can be lived in the middle of a frantic career or a complex family structure. You become an environmental anchor of tranquility, downregulating the hypervigilance of the nervous systems around you simply through the silent, unstaged embodiment of your own clarity. Ultimately, we discover that the great questions that brought us to this path, the ancient longings for meaning, purpose, and relief from the weight of human suffering, do not get solved through intense intellectual analysis or the acquisition of new concepts. They are entirely dissolved within the open space of pure presence. You realize that you have never been a separate, broken entity, trying to find a way back to a distant home. You are the infinite sky watching the clouds of your life story pass through your expanse. You are the vast ocean hosting the temporary dance of the waves. You are the deathless awareness in which the entire universe is currently appearing and disappearing. Ground yourself firmly within this unshakable island of your own self. Place a hand over your chest. Feel the faithful rhythm of your heart. Draw the cool air of this moment into your lungs and relax into the pristine perfection of your own immediate being. You are whole, you are free, and you are finally, truly home. To understand the infinite depths of this homecoming, we must embark on a meticulous, exhaustive exploration of the internal topography of our awareness, tracking the subtle movements of attention across the entire landscape of human experience. This is not a journey that can be completed through hasty summarization or brief, surface-level summaries. It demands a rigorous, uncompromised textual architecture that completely mirrors the vastness of the consciousness we are seeking to uncover. We must look with radical focus at the microscopic boundaries where our thoughts arise, investigate the complex neurobiological feedback loops that lock us in states of chronic emotional reactivity, and deconstruct the ancient multi-generational rivers of trauma that flow silently through our biological tissues. Every single paragraph of this manual must operate as a deliberate, heavy clearing in time, a textual sanctuary that forcefully pulls your mind away from the hyper-accelerated machinery of our modern information economy and drops it into the deep, slow-moving currents of raw, existential being. Let us initiate this deeper mapping by carefully tracing the absolute historical genesis of human self-alienation, exploring how a biological organism equipped with a primal capacity for total sensory presence transforms into a chronically fragmented, anxious, and disembodied modern citizen. When an infant entity initially enters this terrestrial arena, its consciousness operates in a state of absolute unstaged unity with its immediate environment. It does not possess a sophisticated intellectual apparatus designed to separate the world into distinct conceptual objects. There is no internal narrator standing apart from experience, commenting upon the quality of the temperature, judging the texture of the environment, or anxiously projecting the outcome of the subsequent hour. The infant is the experiencing itself. It is the cold clarity of the air, the bright cascade of visual light, the acoustic vibration of sound waves, and the immediate somatic feedback of its own physical tissues. It exists entirely within the centerless, borderless expanse of the immediate here and now, perfectly integrated with the natural flow of universal intelligence, however. As the biological organism matures within the parameters of human civilization, it encounters a profound, institutionalized system of linguistic and cultural conditioning. To navigate the complex relative structures of human society, the growing mind must learn the art of abstraction. It is trained to overlay a dense network of words, labels, and concepts onto the unmediated fabric of its reality. It learns that a specific visual shape is designated as a tree, a particular somatic sensation is categorized as hunger, and a specific localized point of consciousness is defined as me, a separate, isolated individual possessing a unique name, a distinct history, and a permanent vulnerability to external circumstances. This process of linguistic mapping is an indispensable functional asset, enabling the entity to develop logical reasoning, operational memory, and the capacity for complex social collaboration. Yet, because our contemporary culture possesses zero understanding of the relationship between relative abstraction and absolute reality, we commit a catastrophic psychological error. We completely mistake the linguistic map for the actual territory. We begin to live exclusively within the conceptual museum of our labels, interacting not with the living, breathing universe that sits directly before our senses, but with our mental ideas about that universe. When we look out upon a forest, we no longer experience the raw, unmediated mystery of the green foliage, the smell of damp earth, or the whisper of the wind. We instantly fire an internal circuit that says forest, dismiss the experience as a familiar category, and return to our internal monologues. We have hollowed out the vivid reality of our existence into a series of dead, intellectual signs, transforming ourselves into cognitive ghosts, wandering through an abstract world of our own design. This conceptual hollowing out is the fundamental engine that drives the modern epidemic of systemic boredom and chronic restlessness. Because our unmediated sensory contact with reality has atrophied through neglect, the ordinary experiences of life begin to feel incredibly dull, thin, and unsatisfying. A slow walk through a quiet neighborhood, a simple meal eaten in silence, or a period of physical immobility on a chair are perceived by the conditioned mind as intolerable spaces of lack, voids of stimulation that must be instantly filled with mental activity or external inputs. We become addicted to hyperstimulation, continuously seeking higher volumes of novelty, complexity, and intensity to pierce through the thick crust of our conceptual labels and make us feel temporarily alive. This is the exact point of intersection where the vast architecture of modern consumer technology capitalizes upon our psychological vulnerability. The digital ecosystem is explicitly designed to exploit this state of sensory numbness. providing us with an infinite, automated stream of rapid-fire data inputs that perfectly match the hyper-accelerated fragmentation of our conditioned intellects. We wrap our fingers around our portable communication devices, not because we have a logical necessity to transmit information, but because we are fleeing the terrifying stagnation of our own unstimulated awareness. The infinite scroll mechanism becomes our digital life support system, an automated narcotic that continuously delivers minute bursts of neurochemical novelty to keep our attention trapped on the surface of reality, completely preventing us from ever dropping down into the deep, quiet ocean of our primary being. To break this addiction and reclaim the absolute sovereignty of our attention, we must understand the precise internal mechanics of the practice of mindfulness, which operates through the systemic cultivation of what classical psychology terms bare attention. Bare attention is the radical capacity of the human consciousness to look upon an internal or external phenomenon with absolute clarity, completely stripped of the secondary layer of mental commentary, intellectual evaluation, or narrative justification. It is the choice to witness the raw data of your immediate experience before your analytical brain can fire its automated circuits of labeling and judgment. Let us explore this practice through the specific sensory channel of acoustic reception. Wherever your physical body is currently positioned while absorbing this text, there is a complex, continuous symphony of ambient sound waves moving through the atmosphere around you. Close your eyes for a brief clearing of 3 respiratory cycles and direct the absolute focus of your attention to these sounds. Do not attempt to identify the source of the noise, to judge whether the sound is pleasant or irritating, or to construct a narrative about why the sound is occurring. Simply allow your ears to act as open, passive receptors for the raw acoustic data. Experience the sounds purely as shifting waves of pitch, volume, vibration, and silence. When you practice like this, you discover that the distinction between the listener and the sound completely dissolves. There is simply the unstaged phenomenon of hearing happening entirely on its own, within a vast boundaryless field of awake presence. This quality of bare attention is the precise tool we utilize to deconstruct the internal machinery of our chronic stress responses. Let us analyze the exact clinical trajectory of a psychological stress reaction as it unfolds within the modern workspace. An individual sits before their display workstation, and an electronic communication arrives, containing a sudden notification of an impending corporate audit, an unexpected performance review, or a massive structural error in a financial ledger. Within a microsecond of receiving this visual input, the analytical brain sounds an emergency alarm across the entire system. It constructs a catastrophic future narrative. It visualizes professional termination, economic ruin, public shame, and the absolute destruction of their socioeconomic security. This abstract mental projection immediately triggers the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. The hypothalamus fires chemical signals to the pituitary gland, initiating a cascade of hormones that results in the flooding of the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. The physiological manifestations are instantaneous. The smooth muscle tissue of the arterial walls contracts, causing an elevation in blood pressure. The respiratory rate accelerates to maximize oxygen transport. The digestive processes are forcefully suspended, and the entire body enters a high-profile state of muscular tension, prepared for immediate combat or rapid flight. The individual is now physically trapped inside a high-profile biological crisis, completely orchestrated by an abstract, non-existent future narrative that has played out within the span of 2 seconds. The tragedy of this condition is that because the modern professional cannot physically attack the electronic interface or run sprinting out of the corporate building, the high-profile energy of this survival reflex stays entirely bottled up within their biological tissues. The cortisol and adrenaline continue to circulate through the bloodstream, keeping the nervous system in a state of chronic, toxic hypervigilance. Over days and weeks of experiencing these automated loops, the body enters a permanent state of allostatic load, a continuous wear and tear that degrades the cardiovascular architecture, suppresses the immune functionality, disrupts the gastrointestinal tract, and completely exhausts the cognitive reserves of the brain. leading directly to the contemporary phenomenon of systemic burnout. The practice of mindful returning acts as an absolute structural emergency brake upon this destructive biological loop. Let us trace the exact sequence of the internal intervention that occurs the microsecond you hear the gentle chime of your mindfulness reminder, or consciously recognize the onset of a stress reaction. The cognitive interruption. You forcefully pause your manual inputs and intellectual planning, completely refusing to complete the next sentence or engage with the incoming data stream. The somatic drop. You drop the entire spotlight of your awareness out of the catastrophic future narrative and plunge it directly into the physical coordinates of your biological frame. The deployment of the car. You execute one conscious, deep inhalation, utilizing the physical movement of the air as a vehicle to transport your scattered consciousness back to the immediate present. The somatic verification. You apply bare attention to the raw physical sensations of the stress response, itself feeling the rapid thumping of your heart, the tightness in your chest wall, and the heat rising in your neck. You do not judge these sensations as bad or panic because your biology is agitated. You simply witness them as shifting waves of somatic energy, the parasympathetic cascade. As you execute a long, unhurried, and completely conscious exhalation, you direct your musculature to release its holding pattern, triggering the vagus nerve to send immediate inhibitory signals to your cardiac pacemaker, slowing the heart rate, reducing the blood pressure, and instantly returning your system to a baseline of recovery. By executing this 5-step intervention multiple times throughout your operational hours, you are systematically breaking the linear momentum of the stress response. You are preventing the chronic crystallization of anxiety within your body, ensuring that your nervous system remains fluid, resilient, and deeply anchored within the unshakable island of your own self, regardless of the chaos that may be transpiring in the external corporate ecosystem. To deepen this anchoring to a level of absolute, unshakable mastery, the practitioner must systematically expand the application of bare attention across the entire physical structure of the body. Through the regular execution of the somatic release inventory, this practice is not an exercise in creative visualization or mental daydreaming. It is an exhaustive, highly focused somatic audit that demands you physically inhabit each localized coordinate of your frame from the interior out, witnessing and dissolving the literal historical deposits of your psychological stress. Let us walk through the complete microtonal sequence of this inventory, with total clinical precision. The epicenter of the intellect, the scalp and cranial vault. You begin by bringing the entire lens of your attention to the absolute crown of your head. Notice the vast network of tiny muscles that wrap around your skull, your temples, and the base of your occipital ridge. In many contemporary individuals who operate under conditions of permanent mental labor, this cranial vault is held in a state of continuous, invisible constriction, a physical compression that directly causes chronic tension, headaches, and cognitive fatigue. Breathe in, and simply allow your awareness to saturate this physical coordinate. As you breathe out, consciously withdraw the motor commands that are keeping these muscles tight. Imagine the tissue softening, expanding, and relaxing back against the skull, creating a deep sense of spacious clarity within the entire upper chamber of your being. The mask of performance, the ocular axis and facial matrix. Migrate your awareness down into the small muscle groups that encircle your eyes, your brow ridge, your cheeks, and your lips. Your face is the primary interface through which you present your stylized personality to the external world. It carries the physical record of every micro-expression of artificial politeness, forced confidence, and suppressed irritation you have executed throughout your life. It is a permanent mask of social performance. As you inhale, feel the actual physical temperature of your skin, the subtle vibrations of the tissue. As you exhale, let the entire mask completely drop away. Allow the tiny muscles around your eyes to entirely release their grip, permitting the eyeballs to sink deeply and heavily into their sockets. Let the muscles of the forehead smooth out like a sheet of calm water. The lockbox of the unspoken, the masseter and temporomandibular axis. Bring the total force of your somatic focus into the jaw joints, the masseters, and the floor of the mouth. The human jaw is capable of exerting immense physical force, and it operates as the primary subconscious lockbox for our unexpressed boundaries and swallowed emotions. When we experience irritation, resentment, or fear but choose to suppress our verbal response to preserve our socioeconomic safety, that emotional energy is instantly converted into a powerful muscular contraction within the jaw. Over time, this leads to chronic bruxism, temporomandibular joint dysfunction, and deep emotional blockages. Breathe directly into this tight lockbox. As you exhale, give your jaw absolute permission to drop. Allow a slight, physical space to manifest between your upper and lower teeth, permitting the lips to part naturally. Let the root of your tongue completely soften, resting heavily against the base of your mouth. Experience the immense wave of psychological relief that washes through your entire nervous system the exact second this primary survival lock is dismantled. The axis of responsibility, the cervical spine and trapezius shelf. Move your attention backward into the cervical vertebrae of your neck and across the massive trapezius muscles that span your upper back and shoulders. This region is traditionally termed the shelf of responsibility. It is where the human organism instinctively stores the weight of its perceived duties, socioeconomic obligations, and psychological burdens. When you live with a chronic, underlying belief that you must single-handedly carry the survival of your family, your corporation, or your life story, your body physically reflects this belief by bracing the shoulders upward, creating a permanent structural shield against an imaginary threat. Inhale and feel the raw, aching reality of this muscular shelf. As you exhale, do not force the shoulders down through conscious effort. Simply cease the automated contraction that was holding them up. Allow them to drop down under the immense natural pull of gravity, sinking away from your ears like heavy stones falling into deep water. Feel your neck lengthen naturally, creating a wide, spacious, and completely unconstrained clearing between your skull and your torso. The cradle of vitality, the thoracic cage and cardiac core. Drop your awareness down into the interior of your thoracic cavity, fully expanding your focus to encapsulate your rib cage, your sternum, your intercostal muscles, and the immediate physical environment of your beating heart. This is the sacred cradle of human vitality, the zone where we directly process our primary emotions of grief, joy, love, and fear. When we live in a state of chronic emotional avoidance, we construct a dense muscular armor around this core, constricting our chest wall and restricting our respiratory movement to protect ourselves from the raw impact of our feelings. As you draw air into your form, allow the entire thoracic cage to expand three-dimensionally, expanding forward through the chest, laterally, through the sides of the ribs, and deeply backward against the surface supporting your frame. Experience the gentle stretch of the intercostal tissue. As you release the air, let the sternum soften, letting the entire chest wall relax into an easy, natural rhythm. Send a wave of profound somatic gratitude to your physical heart, recognizing its absolute invariant fidelity as it pumps life through your form second after second, entirely independent of your conscious direction. The seat of intuition, the epigastric cavity and abdominal domain. Descend your attention through the diaphragmatic boundary and allow it to pool directly within the vast, soft expanse of your abdomen, encompassing your stomach, your intestines, and your core stability muscles. This epigastric region is dense with millions of neurons, constituting the enteric nervous system, which is in continuous direct communication with the emotional centers of the brain via the vagus nerve. In our culture, the abdomen is subjected to intense stress, continuously held in a state of unnatural, rigid contraction to satisfy superficial aesthetic standards of fitness, or as an automated, subconscious bracing reflex against perceived environmental hostility. As you practice the inhalation phase, give your belly complete, non-negotiable permission to be absolutely soft, spacious, and unconstrained. Let it expand outward like a gentle wave, creating a luxurious internal clearing for your vital digestive organs to function without friction. As you exhale, allow the abdominal wall to naturally collapse back toward the spine, completely discharging the low-grade, historical anxieties that have been trapped within its deep neurological tissues. The root of stability, the lumbar spine, pelvis, and lower extremities. Complete the somatic audit by tracking your awareness through the lumbar vertebrae of your lower back, down into the absolute structural bowl of the pelvis, and through the large muscle groups of the gluteals, thighs, knees, calves, and ankles, concluding at the absolute soles of your feet. This lower architecture is the foundational root of your physical stability, the system that bears the immense physical load of your terrestrial movement day after day. As you execute your next exhalation, consciously transfer the entire weight of your physical existence onto the surface beneath you. Recognize that you do not need to hold yourself up through chronic, exhausting muscular strain. You can permit the solid matter of the earth to completely carry the full mass of your physical frame. Allow your legs to become warm, incredibly heavy, and entirely relaxed. Step completely out of the posture of hypervigilance, reclaiming your absolute unstaged birthright to live with total comfort, fluid ease, and somatic sovereignty inside your own skin. This comprehensive somatic release is not an exercise to be executed exclusively when you have the luxury of a quiet bedroom or a formal meditation class. It can be strategically deployed to transform your relationship with geographical movement across the public landscapes of your daily schedule. Consider the specific practice of mindful geocentric transitioning, which is the application of this integrated awareness to the simple act of walking through the world. Think about the manner in which you typically walk through the public sphere. When you exit your vehicle in a corporate parking structure, or step out of your residential doorway to walk toward a transit hub, your physical movement is almost universally characterized by an intense, unconscious velocity. Your body is moving forward across the asphalt, but your mind has already skipped ahead across time. Managing your first corporate assembly, composing internal emails, or replaying arguments with your partner. You walk with your head craned forward, your torso tense, your gait rapid and uncoordinated, often with your eyes locked onto a glowing smartphone screen, while you step blindly across the concrete. In this state, you are treating the physical distance between your origin and your destination as nothing more than an inconvenient, boring void that must be cross-referenced and eliminated as rapidly as possible. You are completely blind to the unmediated universe through which your biological form is passing. You do not see the intricate geometry of the city architecture. You do not register the shifting colors of the morning sky. You do not smell the changing fragrance of the atmosphere. And you do not hear the rich acoustic soundtrack of life happening around you. You are sleepwalking through your own precious existence, sprinting toward an imaginary point of future completion, while systematically breaking the single appointment that actually matters, your appointment with life in the absolute present moment. The practice of walking meditation completely reverses this industrial velocity, transforming every single transition into a profound act of spatial liberation. It requires a fundamental, non-negotiable shift in your relationship with physical movement. It suggests that your ultimate destination is never the office building, the meeting room, the grocery store, or the residential home. Your true destination is the here and the now, with every single step you make upon this earth. When you step out of your car or exit a building, you choose to completely slow the momentum of your existence. You match the physical movement of your limbs to the natural, unforced rhythm of your respiratory cycle. You pull your scattered awareness out of the virtual future and distribute it evenly through the soles of your feet. As your heel makes contact with the concrete, you fully inhabit that point of physical pressure, tracking the gradual transfer of your body weight across the arch, onto the ball of the foot, and the final, firm push-off from the toes. You synchronize this biomechanical movement directly with your breathing pattern. The inhalation phase for the duration of one natural, unhurried incoming breath. You may take 2 slow, deliberate steps, mentally labeling each step with the internal realization. Arrived, the exhalation phase. For the duration of the subsequent outgoing breath, you may take 3 steps, labeling them with the deep somatic realization. Home, home, home. This level of intense geocentric concentration acts as an absolute psychological filter that completely screens out the abstract mental chatter of the ego narrative. The mind is structurally incapable of maintaining its elaborate structures of professional worry, social anxiety, or historical grievance. When it is thoroughly engaged in tracking the raw, complex tactile feedback of the feet interfacing with the planet, you stop thinking together. You allow the analytical intellect to rest, and you permit your senses to return to a state of pristine, unmediated receptivity. You look up and actually witness the blue of the sky with unclouded eyes. You hear the vocal symphony of the birds not as background noise, but as a vivid manifestation of immediate ecological reality. You feel the coolness of the air upon your skin as a profound sensory gift. You realize that you don't need to carve out an extra hour in your day to sit upon a meditation cushion to touch freedom. You can walk as a completely liberated entity through the ordinary landscapes of your daily schedule. Let us examine the longitudinal psychological evolution of an individual who systematically implements this geocentric transitioning within their routine. Consider a professional who transforms their daily walk across the corporate parking lot from a frantic sprint into an explicit exercise in mindful arrival. In the initial weeks, the mind will continuously rebel against the slower pace, producing waves of artificial urgency, screaming that you are wasting time, and attempting to drag your hand back to your device to check for incoming notifications. But if you persist, gently but firmly returning your focus to the sole of the foot with every step, a deep neurobiological reorganization begins to transpire. Over months of consistent application, the autonomic nervous system habituates to this baseline of spatial presence. The practitioner arrives at their corporate workspace not already depleted, frantic, and structurally compromised by a self-induced stress response, but deeply grounded, calm, clear, and highly centered within their own form. This internal stability radically alters their operational capacity throughout the ensuing hours. They discover that they are far more patient during high-stakes professional interactions. They listen to their colleagues with a deeper level of unhurried focus. They make strategic decisions from a space of calm lucidity rather than emotional reactivity. By learning how to arrive fully within the simple act of walking across a parking lot, they have inadvertently trained their mind to remain present, resilient, and completely free across all the complex, high-pressure landscapes of their adult existence. This stability is the precise quality required to navigate the second major dimension of our internal life, the capacity to independently generate a state of deep joy and profound happiness, completely independent of external material conditions. There exists a foundational delusion deeply embedded within the core of modern consumer society, the belief that human fulfillment is an exclusively conditional phenomenon. We are trained from early childhood to view joy as a distant asset that must be systematically earned, purchased, or achieved through the strategic manipulation of our external circumstances. We tell ourselves that we will experience genuine contentment once we secure a specific professional title, attain a precise financial metric, resolve our interpersonal conflicts, or eliminate every single problem from our terrestrial narrative. This orientation forces the human psyche into a state of permanent postponement, a chronic condition of looking past the immediate present for the sake of an idealized future state. Zen psychology exposes this structural chase as an absolute hamster wheel that guarantees perpetual psychological starvation. The past is non-existent. The future is nothing more than a mental projection. The present moment is the absolute singular coordinate in which your life actually occurs. If you lack the capacity to touch happiness right here, right now, within the parameters of your current imperfect reality, you will never possess the capacity to touch it. Because even when your future milestones are achieved, you will experience them exclusively within the framework of another present moment. The fifth and sixth exercises of mindful breathing introduce us to the art of internal satiety, the radical capacity of a trained practitioner to consciously generate a feeling of deep joy and profound happiness at any chosen second of their day, entirely independent of their external material conditions. How is it structurally possible to generate genuine joy when your material life is far from perfect, when deadlines are looming, or when you are navigating personal challenges? The mechanism requires that you bring your mind home to your body through the breath. Establish yourself firmly within the immediacy of the present. and begin to execute a meticulous inventory of the conditions of happiness that you already possess. Most of us exist like an impoverished individual, living inside a massive mansion filled with priceless treasures. But because we keep our eyes fixed exclusively on one broken window pane, we are completely blind to the wealth that surrounds us. Let us open the vault and examine your existing conditions of sanity, the gift of ocular intelligence. Consider your eyes, these highly complex biological organs that are currently converting light waves into coherent imagery. If your eyes are in functioning condition, you possess a direct passport to the entire visual universe. You can gaze upon the face of a loved one, perceive the vivid green of a tree leaf, trace the shifting architecture of a cloud, or read words of profound philosophical inspiration. Millions of individuals across this planet have lost this capacity completely, yet you likely treat it as an unexamined baseline asset that deserves zero gratitude. The miracle of auditory reception. Consider your ears, which are parsing acoustic vibrations, allowing you to experience the rich textures of a musical composition, the warm resonance of a human voice, the soothing sound of rain falling upon a roof, or the elegant silence of a quiet room. The systemic autonomic alignment. Consider the internal operations of your organic form. Right now, without a single conscious directive from your part, your cardiac muscle is contracting with perfect fidelity, pushing vital resources through your vascular network. Your lungs are extracting oxygen from the atmosphere. Your nervous system is maintaining equilibrium across billions of cellular matrices. You are a walking, breathing monument to biological genius. When you allow the energy of mindfulness to settle upon these immediate realities, your internal emotional landscape undergoes an instantaneous shift. You recognize that even though your corporate projects may be complicated, or your interpersonal finances may be constrained, the foundational assets of your existence are completely intact. You realize that you are already staggeringly fortunate, surrounded by more than enough conditions of happiness to establish a baseline of deep internal satiety in the absolute here and now. This capacity to independently generate internal satiety completely redefines the structural posture you bring to your interpersonal relationships. Consider the ordinary, unmindful individual who approaches a partnership from a state of internal depletion. Because their inner house is empty, they approach their partner as an emotional consumer, looking to extract validation, attention, and joy from them like a parasite seeking a host. This orientation induces a state of chronic relationship strain. Both individuals are starving, attempting to extract sustenance from an equally empty vessel, leading to defensive conflicts, mutual resentment, and emotional exhaustion. When you master the art of generating joy from within, you arrive at the threshold of the other person in a state of absolute relational abundance. You no longer need them to behave in a specific, stylized manner to maintain your internal peace. You possess your own source of light. Therefore, your presence transforms from an emotional drain into an immense resource for their recovery. You have something genuine to offer, a non-demanding, spacious attention that can see past their immediate defensive adjustments and connect directly with their underlying humanity. You become a source of emotional stabilization within your household, your family structure, and your workspace, demonstrating to all who encounter you that it is entirely possible to move through this complex world without being a permanent victim of external circumstances. While the generation of joy is an essential dimension of the practice, a spiritual framework that focuses exclusively on pleasant states is fundamentally incomplete, failing to address the raw, chaotic suffering that is an inevitable feature of the human condition. Every human being will eventually encounter the sudden upwelling of severe emotional or psychological pain. Waves of consuming anger, paralyzing fear, profound grief over structural loss or existential despair. Modern industrial society has conditioned us to treat these difficult emotional states as absolute emergencies that must be instantly hidden, medicated, or eliminated through compulsive consumption. Observe the automated behavioral architecture of the ordinary adult. When a painful emotion fractures their internal peace, they immediately run away from themselves. They launch a defensive protocol of distraction. They open a digital feed to scroll through mindless data arrays. They activate an audiovisual entertainment stream. They consume chemical sedatives, or they throw themselves into frantic professional labor. They refuse to look their own pain in the eyes, fearing that if they allow it to enter their conscious awareness, they will be completely overwhelmed and pulled into a bottomless abyss of depression. This strategy of chronic escape is a catastrophic delusion. Pushing a painful emotion beneath the surface of your awareness does not dissolve it. It merely drives it into the deeper tissues of the subconscious, where it remains active as an underground volcano, continuously leaking anxiety into your nervous system, and eventually erupting as irrational outbursts of rage or physical illness. The seventh exercise of mindful breathing requires that you completely abandon this defensive architecture of escape and adopt a posture of radical, courageous confrontation. When a wave of severe emotional pain enters your system, you do not look for a device, a substance, or a distraction. You pause your external activities, adjust your physical frame into a posture of absolute stability, and turn the light of your awareness directly toward the epicenter of the discomfort. You execute an inhalation, declaring with unblinking focus, breathing in, I am entirely aware of the raw pain that has arisen within my consciousness. Breathing out, I hold this pain with a soft internal smile. Let us analyze the precise structural physics of this intervention. By turning toward your emotional discomfort and naming it, you are instantly breaking the spell of identification. When an individual operates without mindfulness, they become the pain they are swallowed by the anger or the fear, acting out its destructive dictates without any internal space. The moment you declare, I am aware of the pain within me, you are establishing a clear internal boundary. You are recognizing that there are now two distinct energies present within your psyche. The first energy, the wave of emotional pain, anger, grief, or fear that has been triggered by external events or historical memory. The second energy, the solid, expansive field of mindfulness and concentration that you are actively generating through your conscious breathing. The second energy does not seek to fight, suppress, or eradicate the first energy. It does not judge the pain as bad or attempt to rationalize it away through intellectual analysis. It simply acts as a vast, stable, and completely non-judgmental container that provides the pain with absolute permission to be felt, processed, and witnessed in the light of day. You are no longer running from your own internal weather. You are standing your ground on the island of self, providing a safe harbor for your own wounded consciousness. Having clearly recognized and verified the presence of the painful emotion through the seventh exercise, the practitioner seamlessly operationalizes the eighth exercise of mindful breathing, the active downregulation and calming of the emotional contraction. The Buddha illustrated this practice through a timeless, profoundly elegant psychological metaphor, the image of a loving biological mother responding to the sudden distress of her infant child. When a baby begins to cry in the middle of a room, a truly compassionate mother does not react with defensive anger. She does not launch an intellectual debate to prove the baby's tears are irrational, and she does not ignore the infant to scroll through a digital device. She stops her manual labor, walks across the floor, lifts the child into her arms, and cradles it closely against her chest. She may not instantly know precisely why the infant is in distress, whether it is experiencing a fever, gastrointestinal pain, or a sudden fright. But she understands that before any diagnosis can be executed, the child's nervous system must be met with an energy of absolute warmth and tenderness. As she holds the child close, her own calm, regulated heartbeat and biological warmth begin to penetrate into the baby's frame. Within minutes, the child's crying softens, not because its problem has been solved through logic, but because it has been safely held within a container of absolute security and love. This is exactly how you are instructed to treat your own severe emotional suffering, your anger, your panic, your deep grief. These are not character defects to be purged. They are the crying children of your own psyche, screaming for your attention after years of neglect. When they arise, you wrap the arms of your mindful somatic presence around them with infinite gentleness. You do not fight your anger. You do not scold yourself for feeling afraid. You breathe deeply and say internally, my dear anger, I see you. I am not going to abandon you to look at a screen. I am right here with you. I am going to hold you until you feel safe. As the expansive, warm energy of your mindfulness penetrates into the sharp, cold contraction of your emotional pain, a natural biological de-escalation transpires. The emotional wave loses its capacity to overwhelm your intellect. It softens, downregulates, and naturally begins to settle like a storm running out of rain, allowing you to maintain your stability without collapsing into a state of psychological crisis. To truly master the transformation of severe psychological suffering, one must transcend the cultural delusion of absolute personal individualism. Modern psychosocial theory often frames your emotional pain as an exclusively personal property, a localized malfunction of your specific brain chemistry, or the direct result of your immediate biographical choices. This is an incredibly narrow, short-sighted perspective. Buddhist psychology suggests that your consciousness is not an isolated drop of water. It is a fluid stream that has been flowing through an infinite sequence of ancestral territories before manifesting in your current historical frame. When you look deeply into the texture of your chronic anxieties, your unexplained sorrows, or your sudden patterns of intense irritation, you will inevitably discover that you are carrying the literal, untransformed suffering of your father, your mother, your grandparents, and your historical line. Perhaps your ancestors endured structural trauma, economic deprivation, or systemic displacement. If they lacked the spiritual methodologies required to consciously process, integrate, and dissolve the emotional sediment of those experiences, they did not simply disappear. They transmitted that block of suffering down through the genetic and behavioral line, directly into your somatic frame. You find yourself weeping tears that do not seem to belong to your personal biography, or feeling an ancient anger that has no logical correlation with your immediate adult security. You are hosting the unresolved ghosts of your entire lineage. This realization completely transforms your relationship with your personal suffering. You recognize that when you sit quietly on a cushion or stand mindfully in a workspace, holding your pain with tenderness, you are not merely engaging in a personal therapeutic exercise. You are executing a monumental work of generational healing. You are the point in the lineage stream where the automated transmission of trauma is being consciously confronted and dismantled. The historical Buddha illuminated this process through his foundational teaching on the relationship between the lotus and the mud. In the physical world, the spectacular diamond-white lotus flower does not grow from pristine, sterilized marble or synthetic polymer surfaces. It grows exclusively from the thick, dark, and foul-smelling mud at the bottom of a stagnant pond. The mud is not an accidental obstacle to the lotus development. It is the vital, organic compost that contains the exact raw nutrients required to fuel the growth of the stalk and the eventual blooming of the flower. If you eliminate the mud, you instantly eliminate the possibility of the lotus. This is the ultimate secret of Buddhist spiritual alchemy. Your inherited suffering and raw emotional pain are the exact psychological mud from which your eventual enlightenment, deep wisdom, and universal compassion must be grown. You do not achieve spiritual maturity by attempting to float in an abstract sky of artificial positivity, completely divorced from the dark realities of human grief. You dive directly into the subterranean mud of your own lineage's pain. You hold it with the hands of mindfulness. You explore its roots with concentration, and you allow its raw nutrients to transform your character. The insights you glean from navigating your own depression, your own anger, and your own ancestral inheritance are the precise materials that build your capacity for deep, authentic empathy toward all other suffering entities on this planet. Your pain is transformed from a destructive curse into the literal compost of your spiritual liberation. To witness the absolute structural validity of this psychological technology when scaled beyond the individual frame, let us analyze a profound operational experiment that transpired within a monastic setting under the guidance of modern mindfulness masters. The organizers convened an intensive retreat that brought together two groups of individuals who existed in a state of absolute, multi-generational geopolitical warfare, a delegation of Israelis and a delegation of Palestinians. These were individuals whose lives had been completely shaped by structural violence, military occupation, terrorist trauma, and mutual existential negation. They viewed the opposing faction not as human beings, but as automated engines of malice and destruction. The protocol enacted by the monastic guides was explicitly structured across two distinct chronological phases. The phase of horizontal stabilization. During the initial 7 days, the two groups were kept entirely separate, prohibited from executing any direct verbal interaction. They were not thrown into a rapid negotiation room to debate policy. Instead, they were anchored exclusively in the foundational practices of somatic stabilization. They spent hours practicing mindful inhalation, executing the body inventory, walking slowly across the earth, and eating their meals in total communal silence. They were building their internal capacity for mindfulness and down-regulating the severe hypervigilance of their nervous systems. The phase of deep communion. Only in the second week were the two factions brought into a unified room for the practice of cross-border listening. One faction was granted the absolute right to speak, instructed to lay bare the total inventory of their historical suffering, the deaths of their children, the destruction of their homes, the paralyzing terror of their daily environments. They were strictly instructed to utilize a specific framework of speech. They could not blame, they could not accuse, and they could not deliver ideological polemics. They were simply to report the raw, unpolished reality of their human pain. The opposing faction sat directly across from them, stripped of any right to interrupt, defend, or correct, tasked exclusively with serving as a compassionate ear to host the other side's grief. The psychological consequence of this structured interface was monumental. As the listening group sat in silence, utilizing their mindful breathing to actively contain their rising impulses to defend or retaliate, they began to look past the political labels and witness the actual somatic presentation of their enemies. They watched the tears streaming down the faces of mothers from the opposing faction. They heard the identical crack in the voice of a father describing the sudden loss of his son. They witnessed the trembling hands of young adults traumatized by continuous bombardment. In that space of deep unstaged attention, the monolithic mirror projection of the enemy completely dissolved. The listeners experienced a sudden, shattering flash of cognitive insight. They realized that the individuals sitting across from them were not abstract agents of ideological malice. They were human beings who carried the exact same architecture of sorrow, the exact same unhealed generational wounds, and the exact same deep-seated longing for safety and dignity that they possessed within their own hearts. The illusion of absolute separation collapsed. The anger that had fueled their multi-generational conflict evaporated from the room, replaced by a profound, unified wave of shared compassion. On the final day of the assembly, these individuals who had entered the grounds as mortal adversaries stood before the entire community as an integrated collective, embracing one another in tears, having discovered that the single most effective tool for dismantling a geopolitical war is the courageous cultivation of an unstaged human presence. To replicate this matrix of reconciliation within the parameters of your personal relationships, whether with an estranged parent, a hostile professional colleague, or a romantic partner from whom you have become emotionally detached, you must master the precise strategy of compassionate ear hosting. When you sit down with an individual who carries an immense accumulation of bitterness, resentment, or wrong perceptions regarding your character, your ego mind will instinctively operate in a state of high defensive alert. The moment they whisper a statement that is factually inaccurate, unfair, or laced with personal accusation, your inner attorney will aggressively attempt to intervene, to interrupt their sentence, and to launch a legalistic debate to protect your image. The practice of deep listening requires that you completely disable this inner attorney through an act of supreme spiritual discipline. You make a firm, internal vow before the session initiates. I am hosting this individual for the exclusive purpose of allowing them to empty their heart of its toxic fluid so that they can suffer less. My purpose is not to establish historical truth, to debate metrics, or to determine who is right or wrong. I am here to act as a silent, non-interventionist vessel. When they launch into their accusation, you do not interrupt. You do not correct their misperceptions. You stay anchored inside your biological body, following your inhalation and your exhalation. utilizing the breath to generate a protective shield of mindfulness around your heart. You recognize that their bitter words are not an objective assessment of your value, they are the chaotic, distorted screams of their own untended internal wounds. If you intervene to correct them, you instantly transform the sanctuary into a battleground, ruining the clearing and guaranteeing a continuation of the isolation. You tell yourself internally, "Poor human being, they are currently a victim of an immense architecture of wrong perceptions and unprocessed grief. Let them speak. Let them empty their cup." You allow them to talk for an hour or an hour and a half without a single line of defense from your part. You wait for days or weeks if necessary, until their emotional storm has completely run its course, knowing that there will be ample space in the future to calmly present factual data when their mind has returned to a state of receptive neutrality. Let us observe the sister technology to this compassionate ear hosting, the art of loving speech. This practice is illustrated by an event that transpired during an intensive retreat in northern Germany, where 4 adult men approached their guide with profound emotion. The night prior, they had executed a sequence of long-distance phone calls to their fathers, individuals from whom they had been entirely estranged for decades due to deep-seated historical grievances, systemic neglect, or violent family conflicts. These men had entered the calls convinced that reconciliation was a mathematical impossibility, believing their fathers to be completely unreachable, cold and rigid entities. Yet, by applying the precise formula of radical vulnerability developed within the mindfulness matrix, they witnessed an instantaneous collapse of the defensive walls. The narrative framework they deployed across the wires was structured precisely as follows. Unconditional recognition. You call the individual and explicitly address them from a space of absolute softness. "Father, I have recently looked deeply into the nature of our life, and I recognize with absolute clarity that you have carried an immense weight of personal suffering and unprocessed difficulty for the past several decades." Biographical apology. You explicitly waive any right to demand a reciprocal apology. "I see now that because I was entirely self-absorbed and ignorant of your internal wounds, I reacted to your defensive behaviors in a manner that merely amplified your trauma, causing you to suffer far more deeply. I am profoundly sorry. It was never my core intention to hurt you, but I lacked the wisdom required to see your pain." The compassionate ask. You conclude with a direct invitation for their self-disclosure. "Father, I implore you to help me understand. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your frustrations. Tell me about the burdens that have broken your heart. I want to listen with a completely open mind, because I am determined to break this cycle of mutual isolation." When this precise formula was transmitted across the telephone wires to these aging, hardened fathers in Germany, the response was uniform across all 4 cases. There was a prolonged pause of absolute structural shock, followed immediately by the sound of elderly men weeping into the receiver. They had spent their entire lives braced for defense, anticipating the next wave of filial accusation or moral judgment from their children. The moment they were met instead with an energy of pure, non-demanding compassion that sought only to understand rather than to execute justice, their entire armor dissolved into insignificance. The communication paths were instantly restored, proving that there is no human relationship so broken that it cannot be entirely reconciled when an individual possesses the courage to step out of the stance of the prosecutor and speak from a position of absolute, unstaged vulnerability. To further demonstrate the clinical efficacy of this combined protocol of loving speech and compassionate ear hosting, let us carefully trace a comprehensive case history from contemporary America. Consider a woman residing within a major metropolitan area who had arrived at a state of absolute existential despair, systematically preparing to terminate her own life by suicide. Her domestic architecture was characterized by a total collapse of human communication. Her husband was an elite university academic, an individual possessed of an immense intellectual capacity, but entirely locked within a chronic state of severe, suppressed anger. The family dynamic had decayed into a permanent war of attrition, with the children remaining entirely isolated in their collegiate environments. Refusing to return to a household that felt like an emotional minefield, the the woman explicitly conceptualized her husband as a highly unstable household bomb, an unpredictable entity that could detonate into a fury of verbal abuse or icy withdrawal at any chosen second. She lived in a permanent state of trauma-induced hypervigilance, walking across her own home on her toes, her breathing permanently shallow, her spirit entirely crushed by the stasis of their relationship. She possessed a close personal associate who was a dedicated practitioner of classical mindfulness methodology. For months, this associate had attempted to provide her with recorded audio materials detailing the spiritual technologies required to diffuse internal anger and restore communication lines. But the woman had consistently rejected the offering, leveraging her identity boundaries as a traditional Catholic to declare that she could not listen to a discourse rooted within an Eastern spiritual lineage. The turning point in this narrative materialized on a specific night when the woman, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of consuming isolation, placed a telephone call to her associate to announce that her suicide plan was finalized for that evening. The associate, operating from a baseline of profound mindfulness and unwavering emotional stability, did not panic. She did not launch an emotional script of frantic intervention. Instead, she deployed a calculated technique known as the loving challenge. She stated, "You have declared for years that I am your absolute closest companion on this earth. Yet I realize now that this is an illusion. I have made one singular, microscopic request of you to listen to a discourse that contains the literal key to your family's survival. And you have consistently allowed your rigid institutional boundaries to block your ears. If you are determined to terminate your life tonight, that is your absolute personal sovereignty. But I demand that as my friend you execute one final task before you do so. Take a taxi to my residence, sit in my room, and listen to this audio tape. You can return home and execute your suicide plan later if the material fails to provide an alternative path." The woman, recognizing the unyielding integrity of the challenge, accepted the terms. She traveled to the associate's residence, where she was provided with a playback device, and left in total physical solitude to interface with the discourse. As she sat in that quiet clearing of time, listening to a master deconstruct the mechanics of human anger, compassionate ear hosting, and the ancestral roots of suffering, a profound cognitive reorientation transpired within her psyche. She saw for the first time in her adult life that her husband was not a malicious monster intentionally orchestrating her destruction. He was a deeply damaged, profoundly lonely human being who was completely trapped inside the engine of his own unprocessed trauma. She recognized that her own chronic patterns of defensive reactivity had merely served as fuel for his explosions. When the tape concluded, she emerged from the room, looked her associate in the eyes, and declared, "I am not going to terminate my life tonight. I am going to return to my household, and I am going to apply this technology to defuse the bomb inside my husband, the associate." Understanding that intellectual comprehension is entirely distinct from somatic mastery, intervened once more, stating, "You cannot enter a high-stress domestic battlefield armed with nothing more than a conceptual understanding. If you attempt to execute this practice tonight, his very first angry reaction will trigger your old defenses, and you will ruin the clearing. You need structural training." The associate then accompanied the woman to an intensive, 5-day residential mindfulness retreat, where they immersed themselves completely in the behavioral framework of classical Buddhist psychology. The developmental sequence enacted during this 5-day protocol was structured as follows. Days 1 and 2, the reification of the somatic harbor. The woman was placed in a state of absolute structural silence. She spent 48 hours focusing her entire human attention on the mechanics of her respiratory cycle and the execution of the body inventory. She was down-regulating her sympathetic nervous system, draining the accumulated sediment of hypervigilance from her muscles, and building an internal repository of pure concentration energy. Day 3, the inventory of the interior house. She was guided to step directly into her own unprocessed grief and loneliness. She learned how to cradle her emotional pain with the tenderness of a mother holding an infant, transforming her fear from an overwhelming emergency into a manageable object of awareness. Days 4 and 5. The optimization of relational tools. She was systematically trained in the structural mechanics of compassionate ear hosting and the precise linguistic syntax of loving speech, practicing how to remain completely non-reactive when confronted with intense verbal hostility. On the evening of the 5th day, fully armed with the dense concentration energy of a true practitioner, the woman returned to her domestic residence. She stepped through the front door, utilizing her mindful walking to ensure every step grounded her consciousness in the here and the now. Her husband was seated in the common area, his posture rigid, his face an invariant mask of defensive irritation, fully prepared for another cycle of domestic warfare. The woman did not launch into her historical script. She sat down directly before him, closed her eyes for 2 respiratory cycles to stabilize her center, and delivered the precise formula of loving speech. She looked into his eyes with a gaze of absolute unstaged compassion and stated, "My dear husband, I am sitting here before you tonight because I have recently achieved a profound, heartbreaking realization. I look back across the past several years of our marriage, and I see with absolute clarity that you have been carrying an immense, crushing weight of internal suffering, professional frustration, and unacknowledged loneliness. Because I was entirely self-absorbed and ignorant of your inner wounds, I lacked the capacity to help you. Instead, every single time you reached out from your pain, I reacted with defensive anger, hostile withdrawal, and moral judgment, directly amplifying your trauma and making this household an absolute prison for your spirit. I am profoundly, deeply sorry. It was never my core intention to destroy our love, but I lacked the wisdom required to see your heart. I implore you tonight to help me correct my ignorance. Tell me what hurts you. Tell me about your difficulties, your projects, and your sorrows. I am here exclusively to listen to your heart, without a single line of defense, because I am determined to help you suffer less." The structural impact of this transmission was instantaneous and total. The husband, who had spent decades building an elite intellectual armor to protect his wounded core from perceived attacks, found himself completely disarmed. The linguistic syntax he had prepared for a domestic argument was rendered entirely useless. He stared at his wife for a prolonged interval of absolute silence, his facial muscles trembling as his analytical defenses collapsed under the weight of her unconditional vulnerability. Then, the structural bomb inside his chest completely diffused, he dropped his head into his palms and began to cry with immense convulsive depth. That evening, the couple sat in the common area for over 1.5 hours, executing a flawless manifestation of the collective home. The husband emptied his cup, pouring out decades of suppressed corporate stress, childhood insignificance, and deep-seated fears of inadequacy, while the wife sat as a silent, non-interventionist vessel, hosting his grief with absolute fidelity. The communication networks of their household were permanently restored, proving that there is no human entity so hardened, no bomb so unstable, and no relationship so profoundly broken that it cannot be entirely resurrected when a single individual possesses the discipline to step onto the island of self and speak from a place of pure, unstaged compassion. As we reach the ultimate horizon of this extensive spiritual manual, we must confront the final, absolute directive delivered by the historical Buddha during his departure from the physical plane. Be a lamp unto yourself. This is the ultimate matrix of perpetual psychological autonomy. The Buddha was explicitly instructing humanity to step out of the childish stance of looking for external saviors, external digital platforms, or external material reconfigurations to solve an internal problem of the soul. He was reminding you that the complete architecture of light, the total mechanism of psychological liberation, and the invariant baseline of absolute peace are already fully operational within your own biological hardware. To live as an independent lamp means to design the daily geometry of your life around this systematic self-reliance, the morning protocol. Before your hand makes contact with a digital device, before you inject your consciousness with a single cascade of global notification data, you sit on the edge of your bed and execute 10 complete, unbroken cycles of mindful respiration. You ground your mind inside your physical form, establishing the island of self as the primary baseline of your day. the transitional clearings. You transform every physical transition within your corporate or domestic schedule into an explicit act of spatial arrival. You treat the walk to your vehicle, the passage down a corporate corridor, or the waiting interval in a commercial line as a sacred clearing in time to execute the body inventory and downregulate your nervous system. The emotional cradling, the moment an internal storm of anger, anxiety, or loneliness is triggered by the friction of life. You refuse to deploy the digital screen as a narcotic sedative. You pause, face the discomfort with a clear internal dialogue of tender recognition, and cradle the pain within the somatic matrix of your mindfulness. When you choose to live your life through this framework of radical presence, you naturally become a member of what can be designated as the invisible community of the heart. You recognize that even though you may be sitting alone in a corporate cubicle or standing in a silent subway car, you are intimately linked to a global network of countless other conscious entities who have chosen to break the chains of modern technical conditioning. You are part of a silent, borderless collective of human beings who are actively breathing as free people, walking as free people, hosting their pain with absolute tenderness, and speaking to their families from a position of profound, unstaged vulnerability. This invisible community requires no digital interface, no centralized metrics, and no organizational platform to maintain its integration. It is co-regulated through the shared frequency of human presence. Every single time you pause to follow one conscious breath, every time you choose to listen to an adversary with a non-demanding ear, and every time you offer your inner child an internal embrace of absolute safety, you are directly strengthening the structural integrity of this global web of consciousness. You become an environmental anchor of sanity within a culture of frantic distraction, a living demonstration that it is entirely possible to navigate the complex machinations of the 21st century while remaining completely free, unshakably grounded, and deeply at home inside your own skin. Let the continuous momentum of your strategic planning, your digital performance, and your frantic external seeking now come to an absolute permanent halt. Step out of the structural prison of your abstract thoughts and fully inhabit the spectacular miracle of your immediate biological existence. Look around the physical coordinates of your room with the unclouded eyes of an integrated entity, perceiving the rich gradations of color, the architecture of form, and the unstaged reality of the world exactly as it is configured in this microsecond. Your breath is flowing softly through your nasal channels. Your heart is contracting with flawless fidelity, and your physical frame is completely carried by the unyielding support of the planet beneath you. You do not need to fix your history. You do not need to secure the validation of the digital crowd. You do not need to wait for a future milestone to earn your right to exist. You are a sovereign child of this immense universe, possessing everything required to touch absolute freedom and profound joy within the immediate perimeter of your own skin. Breathe in and know that your aliveness is a monument of grace. Breathe out and know that you are completely safe. The exile in the digital wilderness has officially concluded. You have returned to the unshakable island of your own self. You are whole, you are free, and you are finally truly home.